Alright, ladies and gentlemen, this is video 3 or part 3 of our Nature of Sound notes. If you haven't checked out part 1 and part 2, please do that now before you continue on with this video. So at this point, we've talked about a bunch of things. In particular, we've talked about pitch and its relationship with frequency and what pitch means. And you kind of need to know that information as we look at this. So the first thing I want to talk about is what's called the Doppler effect. It's really kind of a neat occurrence or perception of sound, where as something is as a source of sound, let's say it's a motorcycle approaches you, the pitch produced by that motorcycle appears to be higher than it is in reality. Then when it passes you, it appears to be lower than it is in reality. So as a source of sound approaches you, the pitch is higher, and then as it passes by and moves away from you, the pitch is lower. And the cause of this is that the source of sound moving, your position relative to the source of sound, causes the wavelength of those sound waves to shorten, and therefore the frequency increase. And then as it passes and pulls away from you, the distance between you and the source of sound is consistently increasing, stretching the wavelength of those waves and decreasing the frequency. So your perception being reality, the sound actually is higher as the source of the sound approaches you, and lower as the source of sound pulls away from you. This whole thing, again, it's called the Doppler effect. So kind of visually you can look at, they have a police car or fire truck. Someone that's standing back here, because the source of sound is moving, they have these long wavelengths. But the person that's toward the front of the vehicle as the police car or fire truck approaches has compressed shorter wavelengths that make it sound a higher pitch. Or if you look at the kind of at the bottom here, if you're in the middle as the ambulance or fire truck approaches you, you get these short wavelengths on the front side, but as it passes and leaves you, you get longer wavelengths on the back side, or a lower frequency on the back side. So it changes the way in which the fire truck or ambulance or police car sounds. Now, if the ambulance was to stop, then the difference in wavelength on the front side and the back side wouldn't be any different. It would sound identical if it was stopped in front of you or stopped behind you. This only happens because of the movement of the source of sound. So if we can kind of check out a real quick video clip of this, the Doppler effect, this will be with a train. So you want to listen to the whistle from the train as it approaches you, and then again as it passes by you, and you can hear a distinctly different pitch. So this is the train in the background here. You can see with the smoke coming off.
And well away from the edge of platform 2. The approaching train is not scheduled to stop at this station.
Right, and so you can hear that the pitch of the sound changes from when it's approaching you to when it's pulling away from you. And so that, again, that's the Doppler effect. Now, the other thing to talk about, we talked about how high or how low a pitch appears to be. We also need to talk about how loud or how soft a sound appears to be. And we call this loudness. So I know, like in everyday language, people often refer to it as volume, but volume has a different, very specific meaning in the world of science. So when we're talking about how loud or how soft a sound is, we actually call this loudness. And this is determined by the amplitude of the wave, or how much the medium vibrates from its resting position. The more it vibrates, the louder the sound is going to be because of greater amplitude. So greater amplitude means louder sound. Smaller amplitude means softer sound. And we do use those words soft and loud as opposed to high and low. We reserve those terms high and low to refer to pitch, and soft and loud to refer to loudness. So the unit that we use to measure loudness is this unit decibels, and there is a range where sounds can be so loud that they become painful. This is referred to as the human threshold for pain, which is about 120 decibels. So if you think about some sounds, I know this is not a real clear image here, but like something like raindrops maybe on a tin roof or something like that, would be about 40 decibels. A hair dryer about 90 decibels. A chainsaw about 110 decibels. If you had an iPod with your headphones in and just blasting full volume, that's about 115 decibels. You're really getting close to that threshold for pain. And then you have other things like gunshots or fireworks that are beyond this threshold for pain and produce about 140 decibels. Even things like jackhammers, which are like some heavy-duty construction equipment, about 120 decibels. And that's why if you were ever to see someone in a firing range, or see even like TV shows in a firing range, who will have on big protective ear covering because the sound is so loud that it can be painful. So it would definitely be uncomfortable. So that human threshold for pain is about 120 decibels, and anything above that's going to be certainly uncomfortable to listen to. So if we were to look at like some graphs of different sounds, these top two, we would say, well, which one of these is the louder sound? Well, this one has a smaller amplitude, this one has a greater amplitude. So this one on the right-hand side, that would be the sound with the greater amplitude and therefore the louder sound. Now, we've talked on numerous occasions, but just I feel the need to reiterate, what we're seeing here is a transverse wave, and sound waves are not transverse waves. Sound waves are longitudinal waves. But longitudinal waves can be very difficult to observe, especially when we're trying to focus on the amplitude. It just doesn't visually show up all that well. So there's devices called oscilloscopes that will receive the longitudinal wave from a sound wave and then visually display it as a transverse wave. So that's what we're looking at here. This is a transverse representation of a longitudinal wave. So the greater amplitude would mean a louder sound. And then if we were to look at the bottom, if we're looking at what is a lower sound, well, lower refers to pitch. So we're looking for the sound that has a lower frequency, and that would be, again, this one on the right-hand side would be the lower sound. Now, some other things that we kind of need to make sure that we are aware of, some interactions, for wave interactions that refer specifically to sound. Well, we know what reflection is, but we call it echo when we're talking about a sound. An echo is a reflection of a sound wave. So a sound wave comes off, hits some sort of barrier, and then bounces back to the source of that sound. Now, we can, in nature, there are some organisms that use this, and they don't call it echo when we're talking about organisms that use it, but rather we call it echolocation. And this would be things like bats and dolphins and whales that use echolocation as a means of kind of enhancing their sight, or instead of traditional sight where they make a noise, a chirp, or a ping of some sort, and that sound goes out, it hits a barrier, comes back, and the organism or the device then recognizes how far away this object is based on how long it takes the sound to go out and come back. So bats do this, dolphins do this, but we also use this with our own technology in things like submarines. But we don't call it echolocation if it's a human use of these sources, this process of echolocation. When humans are using it within a technology built by humans, instead of calling it echolocation, we call it sonar, S-O-N-A-R. And it's just, again, using sound waves to send sound out, hits a barrier, reflects back, and allows us to tell how far away things are, what shape things are, depending on how those sound waves come back. So this would be like a ship here that's searching, this would be a fishing ship searching for schools of fish. So it sends a sound out, it's referred to as a ping, it hits the fish, and comes back as what's called a pong. So this ship knows, oh, there's something here, and based on how deep the water is, so how quickly the sound comes back, they could make an assumption that it's probably fish there. So that would be a good location for them to stop their boat and try and capture some fish. Now, we also use sound waves for something called ultrasonography. This would be like getting an ultrasound. And sound waves can travel through a patient's body and we end up getting an image based on some reflection back. We get an image of what's happening inside of the body. Where's there materials that are reflecting sound waves back? So this is used for any number of reasons. Most people, I think, probably tie this to pregnancy and getting an ultrasound of the baby. But it's also used to help identify if treatment of dogs, if they ate something or if there's a tumor or something like that. They might use ultrasonography or an ultrasound to help identify what's happening inside that body. Now, there's other things like interference. When we talked about interference, we kind of talked about it in relation to sound before when we were talking about just waves basically. But so there's constructive interference. This is when you have like parts overlap, so a compression of one wave overlap with a compression of another wave. Or if we're looking at it as a transverse through an oscilloscope, it would be like the crest of one wave overlap with the crest of another wave. When they combine together, you get a greater amplitude. And we know that an increase in amplitude means a louder sound. So constructive interference produces louder sounds because of greater amplitude. Or there's destructive interference, which can create softer sounds where opposite parts overlap. So it would be a crest with a trough. Or really, if we're going to talk about it properly, it would be a compression with a rarefaction. If those two waves have exactly the same amplitude, then they can completely cancel each other out. So this is like if you're setting up a surround sound system in your house, it's important to position your speakers properly and have them set in the proper phase so that you're not canceling out the different speakers. Another thing to talk about is this buildup of pressure, because remember, sound waves travel through a medium, so they create compressions. And if you have something traveling very quickly, these compressions can build up and create a very, very, very dense barrier in the medium called the sound barrier. And this happens as a source of sound, like a plane, approaches the speed of sound, where the sound wave produced by the plane is traveling slower than the plane itself is. So the sound wave never actually kind of relative to the position of the plane never moves forward. If you were like standing over here, you would never actually hear the plane because the plane would reach you before the sound wave from the plane would. But that really dense barrier that is produced in front of the plane is called the sound barrier. And if you were to have a plane go faster than the speed of sound, when it breaks through that barrier, it produces just a really loud, explosive sound called a sonic boom. So a sonic boom, you can actually see the results here of a sonic boom as a plane passes through that sound barrier. It's very, very loud. And then the resulting, that sound itself is produced by what's called a shock wave, which is just an immediate shift in pressure as the plane breaks through that sound barrier. So there's a lot of pressure building up in front of the plane. When it breaks through, it goes from a high pressure area right behind that barrier to a low pressure area in front of that barrier. And that shift in pressure is called a shock wave, and it results in the sound called a sonic boom. And the last couple things for us to talk about, is what happens if I walk into the cafeteria during 8th grade lunch. There's a whole lot of sound, and it's sound that I really have no interest in hearing, so it would be called noise. So noise is just a random mixture of sounds that are undesirable. They're not the things that we want to hear. So, that nails on a chalkboard sort of thing. You don't want to hear that, so that would be considered noise. So when we say noise, we're specifically referring to sounds that are undesirable, something that is not intended to be heard or not wanted to be heard. That is considered to be noise. So that's it. That sums up our sound notes. And if you haven't watched those first two videos, you want to kind of go back and make sure you check those out. All right.